Sonic the Hedgehog has had an undeniable chokehold on my life. Despite my age, I grew up playing the original games on the Mega Drive, and from there my love for the world, characters and designs would blossom into the major financial deficit I look at today. After spending this much time with the Hedgehog, I wanted to figure out exactly what it is that hooked me and so many others on this franchise. Sonic's fanbase is infamous for being so loud and outspoken. Every announcement Sega makes relating to Sonic is met with both excitement for new things to come, as well as backlash from fans who wanted something different. The fans aren't just fans of Sonic as a whole, but of different splinters of the franchise. There are fans of the classic games, the modern games, the 2D games, the 3D games, hell, even a rare Sonic 4 fan will speak up about still wanting Episode 3. Before debates of green eyes, tan arms, and sports tape, what exactly is it that made Sonic resonate with video game fans across the world to begin with, and why has that popularity persisted to this day? The year is 1990. Sega are in a bit of a rough spot when it comes to sales. The 16-bit Mega Drive system just isn't pushing enough units to be considered the success that they wanted it to be.
It's real challenge, stereo sound, and the hottest library too, with games like Altered Beast, Golden Axe, Super Hang-On, Forgotten World.
Looking at popular software for the system, Sega would find an answer as to why they were lagging behind in the console wars. What they needed was a new mascot. In the 80s, the 8-bit Master System console sold well in both Europe and South America, and would sell modestly in the USA and its home region of Japan. But Sega wasn't ready to settle for modesty. The mascot for this console, Alex Kidd, wasn't bringing in the big numbers that they wanted. Up until the launch of the Mega Drive, Sega were fine just coasting along, but now they needed more edge, more attitude, something to contrast the sanitized family-friendly image that Nintendo gave video games. Sega would hold an internal design competition for their new mascot, asking for all of their employees to come forward with a new bright idea that could launch Sega into every home. Many designs were rejected. A Teddy Roosevelt look-alike in pajamas, an armadillo, a rabbit that could grab and throw things with its long ears that would end up becoming Rystar. But one small napkin drawing would soon send Sega further than they could have thought. Mr. Needlemouse, designed originally by Phantasy Star developer Naoto Oshima, was the winner. He would attack things by curling into a ball and hurting the enemy with his spikes. He wasn't quite as happy or cutesy as Alex Kidd or Mario, but his design wasn't as gritty as something like Altered Beast. He had just the right level of attitude. This design was polished again and again and again, and eventually the Hedgehog we all know and love was born. Sega explicitly went into this project with one goal in mind: defeat Mario, and by extension defeat Nintendo. In 1990, Nintendo had control of 90% of the video game market. The popularity was totally undeniable, with 1 in 3 American households having the NES sat proudly beside the television. To beat figures like this, Sega knew they couldn't just scrape by. They had to pull out all the stops to overcome this task. Programmer Yuji Naka thought about his experience playing the original Super Mario Bros. Game. Since the game had no save function, players would be forced to play through the game from the beginning each time they booted up the console. This resulted in the first level of the game being played repeatedly, and with this, each player would try to get through the level as quickly as possible. Taking the idea of memorizing a level through replaying it to chart the quickest route and Oshima's character design created the hook that Sonic needed. Speed.
16-bit arcade graphics.
We can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
16-bit arcade action.
We can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does.
16-bit arcade hits.
We can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
What Nintendo don't. The 16-bit Genesis system by Sega. Genesis does it all.
Sega were going in with a full frontal, all guns blazing attack directly on Nintendo. The newly released Super Nintendo Entertainment System was doing well, with Super Mario World leading the charge. This system was in fact more powerful than the Mega Drive in nearly every way. However, the Mega Drive CPU was actually slightly faster than the Super Nintendo, so Sega took this one triumph and ran with it. The Mega Drive was marketed as the first console with blast processing, which they claimed is what made Sonic possible.
The Sega Genesis has blast processing. Super Nintendo doesn't. So what's blast processing do?
Blast processing isn't entirely real, but it was the perfect buzzword to keep the console and Sonic in the public conscience. Sega! On June 23rd, 1991, the world would finally be given Sonic the Hedgehog. Despite the controversy surrounding this collection, I will be playing this game through the Origins collection. I like Christian Whitehead's retro engine, and fans including myself have been crying for the mobile ports to come to PC and console for years, so if Sega are going to present this as the definitive classic Sonic collection, that's how I'm going to treat it. Sega have made sure that this is the most accessible way for people to play the original Sonic games, coming out on all current platforms. After the release of the expansion, Sonic Origins Plus, there's a new playable character in Amy Rose, and the inclusion of a bunch of handheld entries to the collection, bolstering the already impressive roster of games. Something that has always stuck out to me about the title screen of Sonic 1 is just how dynamic it is. Yeah, the main logo is more or less static, but the background whizzes by, showing players the parallax scrolling capabilities of the Mega Drive, as well as a taste of the speed that they're about to experience. The game wastes no time with menus, and upon pressing start, you're immediately thrown into the first stage. From here, the player is left to get acquainted with the controls, how Sonic moves and what he can do. The adjustment period for new players shouldn't take too long, as Sonic was always designed to be playable with just one button. Sonic has only one form of attack, which is curling up into a ball, either by jumping or pressing down on the D-pad when running. The moveset was kept purposely simple, since the player wouldn't be perfecting movesets, but rather the game's physics engine itself. Instead of the straight upward jump of most platformers of the time, Sonic's jumping direction is directly affected by the ground that he's standing on. This is where we talk about the genius design of Green Hill Zone. Similar to World 1-1 in Super Mario Bros., Green Hill Zone Act 1 lays in front of the player standard obstacles to react to. After adjusting to the controls, the first thing that the player finds are a Motobug enemy, a raised platform, and an item box. This tiny little area teaches players a few things, most simply, how to defeat an enemy. Sonic doesn't work quite like Mario, where a player has to jump directly on top of an enemy to defeat it, but when rolled up, Sonic will always do damage to an enemy. This allows players a lot of freedom and flexibility in how they handle enemy encounters, since they can maintain their speed while barreling through badniks. Secondly, the raised platform shows you that you can jump up through platforms to reach a different level. Sonic stages are designed mostly with three routes, a top, middle and bottom. The top route is usually the fastest, but to get there can be quite difficult, with constant obstacles trying to throw you down. The bottom route is normally the slowest, but with the least obstacles. Most players will tend to weave seamlessly between routes without even realising it, since the objective is always just go right. But for those who are willing to replay the game repeatedly, will eventually find the quickest route through a level. Of course, not every level works like this, but that is the core design philosophy of classic Sonic. Players are then quite quickly taught about momentum. Sonic doesn't move at a constant set speed, but will react to the terrain around him. You'll have to gain some speed before making it up a hill or an incline, and going down a hill can catapult Sonic into high speeds, with rolling into a ball being the best way to conserve momentum. In the Origins collection, Sega added the spin dash back into the game. Simply hold down and repeatedly press the jump button to get an instant boost of speed. This is a move that Sonic gained in the sequel, and the original game can feel really sluggish without this feature. So if you're going to play Sonic 1, I'd recommend playing a version that has the spin dash. Sonic doesn't have a health bar, so instead of losing a heart when taking damage or any HP, all of his rings will just burst out of him. As long as Sonic has at least one ring on him, he'll be able to take a hit. This system is interesting, if not a little bit flawed, since rings can be retrieved after Sonic is hit. This can make some boss fights or enemy encounters kind of easy, as players can just use their invincibility frames to score another hit before grabbing the rings. However, when you face a boss with only one ring, the challenge of grabbing it back before it disappears can be quite tense. From here, the player is left to figure things out for themselves, with Green Hill Zone being the perfect testing grounds. Level design in classic Sonic games is far more open than most popular platformers of the era. Instead of a straight line with set obstacles that a player is guaranteed to face in every playthrough, Stages in Sonic are filled with secrets, destroyable walls, hidden item boxes and rings. Sometimes players will see items or ring clusters that they don't have immediate access to, making them think about how they can use the surrounding level elements to make it there and claim the rewards. Undeniably, the main objective of Sonic was speed, but the genius of the level design can only really be seen when you slow down for a second, take in your surroundings and see how they can be used for exploration. For a game of its time, it's incredibly open-ended in the way it can be approached, studied, and replayed. These notes, however, can only really be applied to a few select zones in Sonic 1. After finishing Green Hill, players are sent into Marble Zone. This stage is incredibly linear, slow, and cramped. Sonic's momentum-based moveset doesn't fare well here. Often players need to stop and wait for stage hazards before they move on. This stage was supposedly put here to give players a breather from the breakneck speeds of Green Hill Zone. Instead, it's kind of like when a roller coaster has a stoppage and you have to sit and wait for the thrills to continue. It's a total whiplash of gameplay. Because of this, me, among many other people, used to get stuck here when playing the game as a kid, just because of the sheer difference in gameplay. It took 8 months to design Green Hill Zone, and it shows. Design-wise, it's far and away the best stage in this game. Not to say the rest of the game isn't enjoyable, I always enjoy replaying this game, but I don't approach it like I would every other classic Sonic game. It's still held back by conventional platformer designs, since the physics of Sonic were a new innovation. The level designers hadn't quite understood how to get the most out of Sonic's moveset. The next stage, Spring Yard Zone, does pick up the pace a little. This is considered to be the first casino stage in Sonic, which would become a recurring aesthetic in future games. This stage is full of springs and bumpers to send Sonic off in unpredictable directions, as well as many ramps and half-pipe structures to gain ridiculous speed. This concept would be executed far better in later games, mainly because it falls back into the pitfall of obstacles that stop you in your tracks and make you wait. This stage has loads of nooks and crannies for you to explore, but seems to be a little lacking in the secret department, with some secret areas having absolutely nothing for you to find there, which makes me question, why make this area accessible in the first place? Sonic does have a slight theme of nature versus machinery. The further you get away from the lush environments of Green Hill, you start to see Dr. Robotnik's mechanical rain take South Island in its grip, and you start to see this machinery take hold in Spring Yard. The background has Green Hill's mountains, but just under them you see skyscrapers and buildings taking over the local nature. From here, we go to what is most definitely the worst designed stage of this game. Labyrinth Zone, Sonic's first water level. When creating the character, Naoto Oshima was under the assumption that hedgehogs were really bad swimmers. Turns out, they're fantastic at swimming, but it still remains Sonic's greatest weakness. The aesthetic of this stage is brown, murky, and the music is odd. It can only be described as plunky, and since the underwater controls are incredibly heavy, Sonic can't hope to reach any decent speed here. This stage is full of gotcha traps, platforms that rise to crush you, hidden spike traps and spears that don't take any skill to avoid, just memorization. And last but not least, Sonic can drown. The music that kicks in when Sonic is drowning, paired with the countdown that appears above Sonic's head, creates a great sense of pressure and urgency. So much so that some people's anxiety will skyrocket the second they hear the drowning music. This slow slog of a stage doesn't even end with a proper boss fight. You just chase Robotnik up a straight obstacle course followed by rising water. This was initially going to be the second stage of the game before the developers got off of whatever narcotics they were on. Starlight Zone is a fantastic way for the game's pace to get back on track. Here we really see the mechanical takeover. There is no natural terrain in sight, in favour of steel beams and scaffolding. The loop-de-loops of Green Hill return, and Sonic gets to reach high speeds once again. Terrain is mostly straight and blocky, but it avoids the waiting time that Spring Yard, Labyrinth, and Marble Zone were all brought down by. There are plenty of segments where Sonic gets to reach some blinding speeds. Enemies here are invulnerable. Bombs that explode on a timer and Orbinauts that are always surrounded by spikes make for some difficult traversal. The music that plays behind this stage is some of the best that this soundtrack has to offer, but I don't feel it quite matches the intensity of the level's difficulty. It might be a hot take, but I honestly feel like swapping the tracks for Starlight and Spring Yard Zone would fit both stages just a little bit better. Next up is the last main zone of the game, Scrap Brain Zone. This stage is Robotnik's base, covered in booby traps like floor panels that drop into bottomless pits, electrified floors, fire, saw blades, and crushing devices. Needless to say, this is the most difficult stage in the game, but it doesn't drag. It has just the right amount of speed when perfected, but still, keep slow to avoid the amount of traps that lay before you. The second act sees you storming Robotnik's base from the inside, jumping on gears and pistons to make your way in, and when you finally confront him, he drops you into the last stage of the game, which is sadly enough, another act of Labyrinth Zone. This stage is long, it is slow, it's annoying, arguably the perfect final stretch for a game like this. However, whenever I get here, I always run ahead of the falling platform to shave off a considerable amount of the level. You'll find yourself drowning or just saving yourself by the skin of your teeth. The tension here can be cut with a butter knife. But then finally, a room of red springs brings you up to the final boss. This boss is ridiculously easy, with Robotnik trying to crush Sonic with pistons and then sending out some classic final boss energy balls to, and I use this term loosely, avoid. As a climax, it just doesn't really have the impact it needed, but the music seems to think so. In fact, I haven't really touched upon the bosses as of yet. That's because there isn't much to them here. Going back to Green Hill Zone and we see the most iconic boss fight of the franchise, a swinging ball and chain. And yes, while the ring health system does make this boss a little bit easy, it does always manage to score a hit on me and anyone else that I've ever seen playing it. Marble Zone's boss is incredibly simple, 2 platforms with Robotnik going between them dropping fire. Once you get in a pattern, it's really easy to bring this boss down. Springyard has Robotnik bringing a spike down, taking the ground up with him, and giving Sonic less space to work with. The idea of this boss is really good, but the simple layout of the arena makes it yet another easy ride. Labyrinth, as discussed before, doesn't even have a boss fight, you just jump up a gauntlet of stage hazards with water. Even the boss fight of this zone is only made worse by the presence of water. The only boss left is Starlight Zone. This boss has some good timing mechanics with a lot of flexibility in how to score a hit. You can't just jump up and hit Robotnik, you need to use these balance platforms to either return a spiky explosive that Robotnik sends down, or use the force of that explosive landing on one end of the platform to send Sonic hurling at the Mad Doctor. This boss actually uses elements that are introduced in Starlight Zone with these balance platforms, which is why I think it's the only truly well-designed boss fight in this game. It's cohesive with the level where the others aren't. The other zones come close, with Marble Zone's dropping fire platforms seeming to warn the player, but not quite in the same way as the boss fight. Yes, Labyrinth Zone does put the stage's hazards around, but again, it's hardly even a boss fight. There's no real thought to it, just jump up this challenge gauntlet. But the Starlight fight has just a little bit more to it. You don't just avoid these hazards, you use elements as a tool for success, something that goes along with the Sonic level design philosophy far better than any of the other bosses. Finally, we come to the special stages, and the first appearance of the Chaos Emeralds, of which there were only initially 6 of the 7 that we have now. The way players obtain these emeralds is by holding onto 50 rings by the end of the level and jumping into the giant ring just past the goalpost. This can be a big enough challenge alone because this game has a tendency to throw things at you that you can't really see, making just getting to a special stage really annoying sometimes. After jumping into the giant ring, Sonic is transported to this absolute fever dream of a bonus stage, with psychedelic backgrounds that morph and change while the main stage itself rotates, leaving Sonic in ball form to try and navigate the maze and find the emerald. These stages are immensely difficult to control, with all of these different triggers that you can just fall into. An up or down trigger that changes the speed of the stage's rotation, a bumper that sends you careening off, and lastly a goal circle. While this might seem like the objective, it instead kicks you out of the special stage without attaining the emerald. Most special stages tend to have a fairly linear path toward the emerald, slightly bumping up the difficulty each time, but Special Stage 3 in particular infuriates me to no end. If you don't input anything going into this stage, you're sent straight into some goal circles, sending you out of the stage immediately. There are hardly any walls for you to keep your footing, so you scramble just to keep some form of control, And even when you do find the emerald, the amount of breakable blocks that surrounds it means that you won't be able to properly break through without another rotation of the stage. The only reward that the player gets for obtaining all the emeralds in this game is a different good ending, where the power of the Chaos Emeralds restores nature in Green Hill Zone, and they disappear in a flash of light, leaving Sonic with a hilarious what the fuck face. I can only recommend going after the Chaos Emeralds if you're really into this franchise, especially since the original game only gave you 8 chances to get all 6. 2 mistakes and you're locked out from the good ending. Thank God for the Origins Collection coin system. I must say, the only reason that I collect the emeralds in this game is to add some challenge to a game that I've been playing for over a decade. Of course, future games do make the Chaos Emeralds a worthwhile objective, but here they're nothing but bragging rights. After all is said and done, what actually makes Sonic the Hedgehog the runaway success it was upon release? I still can't put my finger on it. As an overall experience, the first game starts with a really high point, drops heavily and stays there for a while, before a brief pickup, and then drops back down before the ending. The saving grace was Green Hill Zone. The cartridge had no save function, so players would have to replay this stage every time the game was booted up, making most people's memories of the game be mainly just this stage. Sonic's game design would be further tweaked with future releases, but all franchises have to start somewhere. This game does break a lot of conventions of platforming games of the era, but aside from 2 fantastically designed zones, it doesn't totally smash the glass ceiling that it wanted to. But the effort is there. This game has a lot of charm. The graphics are colourful and lively, keeping players interested, even in the boring stages, and the music by Masato Nakamura of Japanese pop band Dreams Come True has stood the test of time and remain great compositions that are constantly being remixed by fans or reused for current Sonic games. So that just leaves us with the question, why is Sonic? The main draw of Sonic games is the flexibility of design. You have one objective: get to the goalpost as fast as you can. The way you get there is up to you.